Thanks, Cheryl. Well, sometimes life shifts in a single moment, not because of something big or planned or dramatic, but because of something ordinary, like a slip on a trail, a fall. Today's guest knows that moment all too well. Without notice, she was forced to stop everything, her music, her work, her parenting, even her own thoughts, because of a traumatic brain injury. Please welcome recording artist, author, and entrepreneur Chantal Dube, a woman whose strength is quiet, whose presence is powerful, and whose words may just give some of you watching today permission to breathe again. Welcome back to 100 Huntley Street, Chantal.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you back. You are no stranger to our 100 Huntley Street audience, as you've shared your music and a bit of your infertility and adoption journey with us in the past. But you've just come through a whole new, unexpected chapter in your story. I want to jump right into it because there's so much to cover. There's so much that God revealed to you. You learned about yourself through this journey. Let's go back to the day that everything changed. You had just picked up a new planner.
Yes.
Excited to fill it with ideas and plans and agenda, and then everything changed.
Yeah. So that year I had paid way too much money for an incredible planner that was going to help me fulfill all of my dreams and ambitions. And that was the year that, everything was going to come into place. I had just finished writing a book, and this was the year I was going to find an author, maybe a a publisher and a literary agent, and just get that book going to the next level, right? And I had big dreams, and everything just came to a halt one day.
Can you share exactly what happened that day? Because it was just, you were out with the kids.
Yeah.
You were out enjoying a trail walk. And you realized very shortly after that fall was not just going to be a little bump in the road, but it was actually going to be a full-on lasting pause. Yeah,
so what happened was it was March break, and we had a bit of a meltdown. So when the snow melts, it then turns into ice, and so the whole trail was very slippery. And unfortunately, I wanted to persevere to the end of that trail to see those waterfalls. And it was at that point that I slipped and fell, hitting the back of my head. I had never experienced or remembered experiencing a concussion before, but something in the pit of my gut told me that I had actually just experienced a concussion. I felt very nauseous and very dizzy. And it was an hour hike out of the trail, so that was challenging. And at that point, I realized this is going to be more than a small pause in my life.
Yeah, you described those early days of your injury as feeling like you were lying awake in a coma.
That's right.
That's a pretty haunting image. What was it like to be so aware of your needs but unable to meet them or even explain them to others, which, when we want to go to others for help, that's one thing, but when we can't explain what we need for that help.
Yeah. I think that at that point it was really helpful to know that I had a team around me of people that were going to advocate for me and advocate for my health. Having my family there was really important because I had never felt so helpless in my life. I've always been the planner. I've always been the one who would think ahead. I've always been that performer who has it all together. And all of a sudden, I couldn't even really articulate a sentence or really put into words what my needs were at the time. It was life-changing.
Yeah, and I think what's important to mention, especially this being Brain Injury Awareness Month, that concussions, brain injury can take on any number of forms. Like, it's not necessarily one size fits all. We're not necessarily sure how it's going to affect one to the next. But you describe, the place of comfort was silence and darkness for you, right? And these were comforts for you, almost lifelines, if you will. Talk to us a little bit about that, because overstimulus can really be a big part of it, right?
Absolutely. So for several months, it was about being silent, being still, and finding hope and peace in those places. Being in the dark, definitely it was a time in my life where I had to take this pause that I didn't want to take at the time. I really did look at my brain injury at the beginning as an interruption, but now looking back, I definitely see it as a pause that God really intended for my life. And I'm actually really thankful for that pause now.
Yeah, and I know faith has always been a very integral part to your story.
Absolutely.
You've shared that unabashedly here on the program. You talk about even going to church being a challenge for you. I mean, when the worship band got up to lead worship, it was just like, it's just too much.
Yeah.
Where did you find solace when you needed to express and commune with God in terms of your faith? Because you had to make some decisions.
Yes, I had to make a lot of changes. So church was one of those big challenges for me, something that I love to do on a routine basis that I had to definitely change. So I found a little candlelight service, actually only 10 minutes from my home, and there was no participation required, and only one acoustic instrument was performing there each night. And so I found solace there. I also found solace in the Psalms. When I was able to read a little bit, I would just read the Psalms very slowly throughout the song and just mark down like little verses that I found would bring me comfort. And, we all know there's a lot of peace and hope in the Psalms. And there's a lot of verses that helped me process my lamenting as well.
Mm-hmm. Interesting side note, that candlelight service, there was a harpist there you found out was actually one of your former students.
Yes.
How cool is that?
That was a really full circle, unpredictable moment. Yes. Yeah. One of my former students was actually now, God was using her to minister to me in that moment. So when I couldn't even perform myself, she was performing for me and bringing me comfort. It was an incredible moment. What a gift that was.
Absolutely. And God is about giving us those little gifts and signs along the way that we're not forgotten. But your recovery didn't necessarily lead to a happy ending per se. In some ways, you had to grieve the loss of certain aspects of life or the way you were accustomed to living life and perhaps adopt a new normal.
Yeah.
What has that been like for you?
So I tell people now that I'm the same but different. And I've had to make a lot of changes and grieve a lot of things. Ambiguous grief is something that I had to learn a lot about. And I had to accept a lot of changes in my life and work through the grief of that. But I think that I'm better for it. Definitely, I've changed, but I'm more intentional about the way I spend my days, and I've got my values very clearly aligned. I only have so much capacity in a day, so I'm very intentional about how I go about my day, and yeah.
Yeah, and how did others come into play? Because you're a very self-sufficient person, successful in a number of different disciplines. You're, overseeing a home, 2 children, you and your husband have multiple businesses, you've got that entrepreneurial spirit which makes you very driven.
Yeah.
But you could no longer be the hero of your own story. You had to depend on others. What's that like for someone that's very driven?
Yeah, so what I tell people as well now is I could not save myself. I could not be the hero of my own story. And I think that that's a very common message that we hear. But it's not necessarily true. And I think that relying on God and also the people around me was something that I had to learn very quickly. But I'm very thankful because none of us can really be the hero of our own story, right? We need to rely on our family and ultimately God to bring in the right people to support us and help us through this journey.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And speaking of, one of the new titles you added to your ever-growing resume was author. And I think it's important to mention to our viewers, you had finished writing God is Not Random, the title of your book, Learning the Rhythm of Trust, which is really about the unforced rhythms of God's grace and provision and presence in our lives. You'd finished writing the book, as you mentioned. You were looking for a literary agent or a publishing opportunity, and then this accident happened. And as you are in recovery, you're struggling to even read at times, perhaps writing, gathering thoughts, putting them pen to paper were a challenge for you. You decided to go back.
Yeah.
Why was that important for you to do that?
Well, I actually didn't even look at the book or open the file for about 18 months, but I decided that my story wasn't finished and I needed to include some of the lessons that God was teaching me at that time through this injury and through this concussion. So I decided to go back and revise the book, and I was so glad that I had that opportunity because I revised it a lot more softly, and I also included a few things I learned on my concussion journey and that recovery time, which I think was really important to include, especially the whole performance aspect of it. I definitely put a lot of my identity in performing, and so I've taken the focus off of that and focus more on being present.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because, something that really struck a chord with me, being a singer-songwriter, a recording artist as well, a broadcaster, I wear a number of different hats as well. It's hard to make the distinction between who I am in Christ and what I do, and oftentimes those lines get blurred. What has Chantal learned about making that distinction and the importance for all of us to come to that place of understanding who we are apart from what we do?
Yeah, well, God loves us for who we are, not what we do. And so it wasn't about what I could do or not do. It's just about the relationship that I have with God and how I can grow closer to Him and have a more intimate connection with God. And so that doesn't require any performance.
I love that. And if someone's watching right now, Chantal, and they're like, okay, I'm feeling a bit lost. I'm feeling unseen, unheard. Perhaps they've suffered an injury. They're feeling stuck in their recovery. What would you say to that person right now that might offer words of encouragement that God has taught you in your own journey and how to depend on Him? What would you share with that person right now?
I love the story about Hagar and how she's in the wilderness and she feels really abandoned and she's on the run. Having a concussion is a very lonely and dark time of recovery. And so I wasn't running from anything, but I did feel very abandoned and alone. Even though my family was there, it was just a very lonely time. And she says that, God sees us and God hears us. And I think that would be my message, that God sees you and that He hears you. And there's a purpose, and we have to persevere through the suffering. That's really been important for me, to persevere through the suffering, because there's definitely purpose in everything. It's sometimes hard to see in that moment, but my suffering, for me personally, resolved into harmony because I was intentional about how I went through it and just really leaning into God.
And you have not shied away from tackling your suffering head on, as you've shared with us other challenges you've had in your life up to this point. How are you today? How is Chantal today? How is the recovery journey with the brain injury?
Yeah, so I would say to people that I'm the same but different. There's things that I do that may look the same, but I do them differently. Like I said, I have different values, different goals, and I spend my time a lot more intentionally.
I love that. Well, Chantal, there's no mistaking the fact that God has entrusted you with the task, whether you wanted it or not, of encouraging others to trust Him. Your lived experiences have been the impetus for this special mission that you are on, and I thank you for sharing with us again today so candidly and honestly. Her book is God is Not Random, and I just love the title, Learning the Rhythm of Trust and Knowing How to Respond to Those Unforced Rhythms of God's Grace and Mercy in Our Lives. Thank you so much for being with us again. And
Thank you.
And this time you didn't have to bring your harp.
No.
So your load was a little bit lighter, but perhaps next time. God bless you.
Thank you.